Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Overcoming Graduation with Brian Drury. Now, for anybody who is new to the show, Overcoming Graduation is a show where I work to teach you everything you need to learn about life to live the life of your dreams. And today marks an especially exciting milestone because this is episode 50. Now, it has been a crazy journey since just over a year ago starting this show. I've been able to connect with amazing, incredible people all over the world. This podcast helped me through one of the toughest times in my life in losing my mom and has been a continued source of inspiration and connection and is just something that has been so special, and I'm so thankful. So one shout out to Brad Costanzo for giving me the idea to do a podcast. I also need to shout out Peter Scott for guiding me and coaching me and helping me through that difficult time and helping me to focus on creating content and spreading my message with the world. I'd like to thank all of my guests for being a part of this and for sharing their stories vulnerably and authentically. And I'd like to thank all of you for listening and for motivating me to continue putting my message out into the world, for sending me your feedback and your comments and letting me know how this has impacted your life, because this has become a huge piece of who I am and how I show up in the world. So I just can't thank you enough for being a part of this. Now, to continue on this journey with episode 50, I have a wonderful new friend in my life named Danny Fishman. Now, Danny is an expert in so many different areas, it's probably going to blow your mind a little bit. But Danny has worked in digital marketing, media, sales, advertising, and has worked with some of the top tech companies in LA. He's started multiple businesses. He's worked all over the world. He's a world traveler. He actually passed the bar and went to law school. So he's done so many amazing things. But what I love the most about Danny is his mentality and the way he shows up in the world, because he is all about being authentic, about being you, and using that to create genuine connections. So Danny is going to explain to us how life and sales can be very similar at times. And in fact, you could even say that so many of the instances that we come in contact with in life are sales situations. Now, what I love about Danny's approach is he is not the old school stereotype of the sleazy used car salesman. Danny is about finding real connections, people that you can provide real value to, and then conveying that value so that you're solving a difficult problem for them. So he's going to be walking us through his story about how a mentality of how can I avoid the real world took him from undergrad to law school, then off to traveling the world, how his life dramatically changed when he was in school, when he stopped focusing on doing well on tests and focused on becoming an avid learner. He's going to share an emotionally heart-wrenching story about how he lost his first son, Kal-El, before his first birthday, and how this pushed Danny to his limits and changed his life forever. He'll share some of the most important lessons he learned from that experience and how you can use those lessons he learned to help you through difficult times in your life. He's also going to talk about how to be a confident parent and why he never feels insecure around any parents anymore. He's also going to talk and take us into the world of sales, giving his top 5 recommendations on how to succeed in sales. He's going to explain to us the top lessons he's learned from traveling to 36 different countries, and he's only 43 years old. He'll talk about how bringing a teddy bear to sales meetings helps him to close sales and helps him to genuinely express himself in the world. And then he's also going to share with us the story of how he got to make a prank call with Leonard Nimoy. So on top of that, you're going to be getting so much more and so many more interesting lessons. Danny is a fantastic friend in my life, and I'm so excited to share his story with you. So without any further ado, let me kick off episode 50 by introducing you to Danny Fishman. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Overcoming Graduation with Brian Drury. So today my guest is going to take us into a world and an area that we have never touched on Overcoming Graduation. And we didn't just get anybody for today's show. My guest is Danny Fishman. And to give you just a little bit of a background on who this guy is and how fortunate we are to have him on the show, he spent most of his career in entertainment marketing and digital media. And just to give a brief summary of some of the things he's done, he was the president of the Digital Broadcasting Group. He was a partner in the Believe Entertainment Group, and now just recently launched Accelerate. So 3 different major roles. He's very excited about the recent release to the press of the news about Accelerate. So Danny, first off, congratulations, and secondly, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Don't get overly impressed with the titles. The one great thing about being in the digital media space is, having jumped into this space, I was fortunate enough to actually be able to make up my own titles for many years. Even early in my career, I remember when I kept promoting myself by getting new business cards. So titles are a little overrated.
Well, I mean, hey, you know what? You took that opportunity to create your own titles and rolled with it. You could have gone with like Czar or something. You could have even gone bigger. But awesome, Danny. So for the listeners, Danny is going to undersell himself, and I'm going to celebrate him right there. So stuff he's done is amazing. I was reading through some of his bios and the work he's done, so I'm very excited to hear his story. And Danny, like I said, what I love to do is start these interviews off by kicking off at college graduation. So I know you went to UW-Madison, and first I'd like to start with, what were you studying, and what were your thoughts and feelings about the quote-unquote real world right when you were at that graduation point?
All right, so from a studying standpoint, it was funny. I started going the business school direction, and actually the day that I got into the business school at University of Wisconsin was the day that I decided I didn't want to go to the business school because it was funny because I had kind of a realization. I started looking at the curriculum and realizing how specific it was. And I actually, it was funny because I always knew that I wanted to go into quote unquote business, but I saw a political science angle allowed me to really go much broader from an elective standpoint. And randomly enough, I actually ended up getting a BS instead of a BA because my last semester of college, I learned that I was only 1 physical science credit away from a BS. And in turn, I literally took a course, Gems and Precious Stones, because it was the only single physical science credit. And it was honestly, between college and law school and the other education I've ever been a part of, by far and away the hardest class that I've ever had.
No way.
Yeah, but I kind of nailed it. I got my wife a good ring.
See, there's a perfect lesson about where people consider like, oh, this knowledge will never be useful. I'm never going to need this. And your wife got the perfect ring as a result. So you just spun that into something useful.
Well, that had a little more to the fact that my dad, who was an attorney, got the guy who sold me the ring out of some legal trouble. But that's a whole different.
We might get to that story if we have time. But okay, I love that story because it's funny how many people come on the show and we talk about, why you picked a major or what classes you took or how you ended up in getting a certain degree. And so often it's just the most random smattering. Like one guy said, the girl I liked was going to be a chiropractor, so I said I want to be a chiropractor. And it's amazing how we end up here. So when you hit that point, you had decided to kind of shift your focus because you saw a much broader spectrum of classes that you could take. Now you hit graduation. What were you feeling about the real world, and what was your first step into the quote-unquote real world?
Well, the funny enough was, how can I continue not facing the real world? So I in turn went to law school.
Okay.
I went straight from college to law school knowing 100%, even before I took the LSAT, that I had no desire to practice law.
Wow.
If you want to go to the offices of Fishman in Chicago, 134 North LaSalle Street, and see my father and my brother, you will learn very quickly why I didn't want to practice law. So funny enough, I ended up having some entrepreneurial businesses during law school, including a club promoting business. I was that kind of random outlier in law school who was running around. And actually, funny thing is, I studied really hard. I mean, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I wasn't a very good student up until my sophomore year of college. I grew up just being able to be a crammer and kind of hit the tests and versus actually really focusing on the learning process. And funny enough, in college, I had a moment where I actually, and you know me, I'm a pretty laid back guy.
Right.
I had a total panic attack in an accounting exam. And my buddy looks at me, he's like, dude, calm down. He's like, you okay? And then I calmed down afterwards. I ended up having just one of those life-changing philosophical reflective moments of what was that? And then in turn evaluating, why am I here? Mm-hmm. I'm not here to pass tests. This education's costing a fortune, and I realized that I was there to learn. And funny enough, that was really something that shaped me and changed me for good, from the standpoint of I realized that I was there to learn, and I suddenly after that never focused on a test again and became a very dedicated student who was truly there to learn. Mm-hmm. And then as such, when the test came, I had no problem because I really learned the course, and that's something that has become very relevant and something that it's actually a story that I tell, not always in such detail, but I in my business now, when I've always been growing my own businesses or now helping other people build their businesses, I talk about really focusing on running your business for the long term, especially in the digital media space where I so frequently see companies that are cramming for the test. They get rich mm-hmm. quick. Let's show a bunch of top line revenue. Let's build some shoddy, questionable, even fraudulent infrastructure and try to get a sale. Mm-hmm. Versus I tell everybody, don't build your business to sell it. Build your business to have it operate the same way of having that long-term, focus in learning, of not studying for the course, not building for the sale, mm-hmm. turn focusing on just building for the long term. And that's a very important message that I really try and give every business person, every entrepreneur I know.
Mm-hmm. And Danny, so I loved what you said there about, so one, for the listeners, no matter where you are in life, whether you're in school, out, whether you're lost and confused, identifying what you're doing and why is so, so critical. Because if you identify what your goals are, as Danny's saying, and you picture your long term, if you think a couple years out, people debate whether it should be 5 years, 10 years, but I think especially for our generation, for us younger people, you can think a little shorter term, maybe even 3 years out. If you identified your ideal life in 3 years and then reverse engineer that, this is something I heard from Cameron Harold on the Art of Charm podcast, but look 3 years out, identify your ideal reality, then reverse engineer that to today, and what are the action steps that you need to take this year, this month, and in the next hour to become that person that can live that life. And Danny, it sounds to me, it's like this is a very similar message that you're saying, is that one, you had to identify why you were there in the first place. And when you did that, it really shifted the way that you showed up every day. Would you say that's accurate?
Dramatically. I mean, a full, I almost said 360, but I guess that would put me right in the same direction.
Awesome. Okay, great. And I love that, because what I think is so profound about life is that many of our biggest realizations, our moments of the deepest clarity, can come at seemingly unsuspecting moments. We may be expecting, it's like, if you hike a mountain and you're standing on top and you look out, or you go visit the Eiffel Tower, everything's going to fall into place. But you said it was in an accounting exam, and all of a sudden you're just like, what am I doing? So it seems that most people have some kind of trigger, some kind of moment that makes them realize that something isn't right, and I want to make this right so that I can live the life I'm meant to. So it sounds like that was that moment for you. And so when you went into law school, you said you did well, but you were kind of the outlier. What was the experience like in law school, being both an entrepreneur and a law school student?
I realized a variety of things. One is why I hate lawyers. My family excluded, but it's funny because it was actually very interesting being in law school, there to learn versus there to focus on class rank. It's funny because I walk in, that scene from The Paper Chase where literally he tells you, the professor tells you to look on both sides of you and says one of those people won't be there by the time you graduate. And I look around, I'm like, I like both those guys. I don't want either of them to be gone. And it was an interesting situation though, because it was a hyper competitive environment. And I would take these like crazy notes that very organized. Afterwards, I would transcribe them, and by the end of the semester, I had my own book of my own notes of combination of the lecture and the book and everything else. And I was willing to share those with everybody. And on the rare occasion that I actually missed a lecture, I would ask someone for notes, and suddenly they didn't have notes for it. So, and it's funny because I'm the youngest of 4 kids. I grew up in a world of collaboration by necessity, because if I didn't, I wouldn't get to play with anything. I wouldn't get to eat anything or anything else. But with all of that, having that focus, I really. My friend, I also went to law school in Chicago where I grew up. So like in Wisconsin, I was making all new friends and everything else. In law school, I didn't make that many friends, but I also had my own environment there. Mm-hmm. But it was just interesting to see how many of those people didn't have that, had not yet learned that lesson of you're actually here to learn. You're not here just about class rank and being competitive. It was fascinating. It was like funny because I think people thought I was nuts. I was gone and this crazy like club promoter, but who was also sitting front row in every law school class. See, they didn't know what the hell to make of me.
I feel like you should have had just some crazy wardrobe as well and been
exactly.
like talking to a squirrel outside, something like that. But and what I love about this message is it's not just a message for people in school. It's that's what I really believe we're here to do, period, is to my dad says he believes one of the greatest compliments you can give someone is that they're eternally curious. Because the people who are in their 70s and 80s who are still living fun, engaging lives and they're staying sharp mentally are the ones that are learning. And they're constantly interested in something. And it may just be learning about the person next door or learning a new person's story. But for all the listeners, consider this, especially if you're a person who is in some kind of hyper-competitive environment like law school. What is it you're really working towards? Because if you gear all of your, if you attach all of your purpose and all of your meaning towards being the best and winning every time, your whole life is just going to be a cycle of working to be the best and win, and working to be the best and win. And so you'll get a lot of money and success and prestige. And then when you reach a point where you stop and look back on your life, what is the impact you've left? Have you really worked towards your goals, or has this just been something to boost ego or show other people up? So, like Danny said, when he had that different approach to education, he was learning and engaging, and he was getting great value, and it wasn't about being number one in the class, and he helped and shared and connected with other people. And Danny, would you say you had a lot more fun than most people in law school as a result of that mindset?
Absolutely, and I achieved my goal of not being number one in the class.
Booyah! That's fair. I like that goal. I want to not be number one. But that's great. And so, all right, so now you went through law school.
I loved law school. It's funny because most people sort of bitch about it. Mm-hmm. I actually really enjoyed it because, again, I was there to learn, and it's just, it was much easier in that regard because I was focused on taking in incredible information that proved to be useful in all different aspects of life.
And that's another critical message. Well, first off, I don't think I've ever actually heard someone say they enjoyed law school. All of my friends who are in law school, it's like they're miserable. And I mean, granted, it's, you know, big first world problems. Like, oh, I'm at this big fancy law school and it's hard. But I get they work hard. But that's just a huge recurring theme on this show, is everyone I have on talks about the applicability of seemingly useless or distant information in often totally unrelated scenarios that has helped them grow, connect. So to all the listeners, especially when there's something that you're being told you need to learn, or it's something in school, if you take Danny's approach and focus on getting good at learning, not just, you know, remembering and regurgitating whatever you need for the exam, then when it comes to the time where you have the freedom to look into the things you want to, you'll be much faster, you'll be able to retain more, you'll be able to apply more, and overall be able to live the life that you're picturing for yourself much, much faster. So Danny, you hit this point where you've gone through law school, you had fun with it, which is shocking but awesome. And so what was that next step after law school? Because again, you said at the end of school you were trying to postpone the real world. So what happened when the real world came?
So I postponed one more time, and so I took the money that I made in my club promoting business, which, you know, at the time seemed like a fortune, and in retrospect wasn't, but, you know, for a kid it was. And I went and took the Illinois bar exam. I knew that I wanted to move to California eventually. I thought I was moving to California for a year, and that was 18 years ago that I've been here now. But, you know, I took the Illinois bar exam, and then there was a 6-month gap between Illinois and California. So I did what any responsible young adult would do at that time. I bought a one-way plane ticket to Europe and a multi-month rail pass.
Awesome.
And went and traveled by myself for 6 months, which was actually one of the most valuable experiences I've ever had in my life. It was funny because I'll go kind of a little bit of a tangent direction right now, but you know, I actually, when I was young, I had a lot of sort of homesickness issues when I went to camp and everything else. A lot of had to do with the backdrop of divorce that was going on in my home and a bunch of other stuff like that. But during law school, I went abroad for a semester. I actually went to Tel Aviv University for a semester and spent a summer over there. But post law school, I knew that I had this challenge of that sort of independence of doing that. So I literally bought a plane ticket, thought I was going away for 3-4 weeks, and then ended up being there for 6 months. And I remember just another sort of pivotal moment in my life. It was funny because I'd gone away to college. It wasn't like I was some homebody who was scared to go away, but I still had this kind of fear of kind of being away and a bunch of other sort of things on top of that. Mm-hmm. And I remember sort of a very key moment on that trip. So I'd gotten there. When I arrived, by the way, I arrived in Brussels, which turned out I hated that city. And I thought, all right, I'll stay for 3 or 4 days. I'll go home and everything else. Next day, I took a train to Amsterdam, and that was when I started really meeting other travelers and really when my trip began. But I remember a couple of weeks into it, I called my dad up, and I was walking to the Eiffel Tower, and I stopped at a payphone, called him up, and just said, hey, whatever. So let me go back for a second. When I was in Brussels, I remember I landed, and I landed early in the morning. It was like an overnight flight. I get to my hostel, and no one's even up yet. I meet some travelers, like no one that I really connected with. I spent, when I was would walk away from the hostel, I remember walking down a street and then looking back to make sure I could actually find my way back to the hostel. Mm-hmm. And I sort of went down another block and everything else, and I kept looking back just to make sure I knew my way back. And then a couple of weeks later, I remember I'm on my way to the Eiffel Tower. I call my dad up to say, hey, just want to let you know all's great over here. All right, I got to go. And I remember just focusing on forward of getting to that Eiffel Tower versus looking backwards, or even thinking for a second, I'm not going to be able to get back there. And it was it was one of those, like, very, very, very small steps for anybody, but a true sort of breakthrough for me of really looking forward in life and not focusing on how am I going to get back to my safe zone.
Dude, that's amazing.
And just a couple of week period, it was just learning that trust in myself of, what am I doing? Of course I'll get back. Why am I, as you and I know, famous words, I got this.
Exactly. And what I love about that story, so for all the listeners, if you consider that was a huge step out of Danny's comfort zone. He said it wasn't just the fear of not being around what's normal or the homesickness. There were a lot of other fears that he knew he was going to deliberately confront if he did this. So when you're looking at your life, take a moment right now and consider an area that you've been holding back. It doesn't need to be anything as big as taking a trip to another country. There could be a person that you've been waiting to talk to, a class you've been waiting to try, or a restaurant you've been waiting to visit. But we get very comfortable in our routines because we think it's safe. But as you heard from Danny's story, going on this trip broke him out of his comfort zone, introduced him to new strength, new ability that he had never experienced before. And by doing this, he met amazing people, had life-changing experiences. So keep in mind, it's often only you who's holding you back from these experiences. So Danny, traveling has been one of the biggest things in my life as well. I just got back from living in Brazil for 5 months, and that was absolutely life-changing. So can you share for the listeners, especially the people who haven't done any type of big travel yet, or even gone outside their state, what are some of the biggest things that you gained through this 6 months of travel?
An incredible level of confidence. I came back saying I could do anything. It was funny because I started, in more Western Europe and ended up in more Eastern Europe and doing some grittier stuff and everything else. But it's funny. One of the biggest things, just on a general, and this is something I just learned through that experience and sort of just repeat this, is always not facing your fears and actually doing something truly in the face of, and completely not just confronting your fear, but getting out of that comfort zone. The biggest rewards that I've had personally in life have been based on doing that, on saying this is something I'm afraid of. I'm going to go right at it. And doing so, but from a travel standpoint in general. So my sort of stated goal for myself in life is to have one country visited for every year on the planet. And I'm now 43, and I was doing the math recently. I've either been to 36 or 37 countries.
Wow.
I think it's whether I'm counting Vatican City or not. And I think for the purpose of the count that I get to count it, so I'm going to say 37. But from a travel standpoint, you learn, one is that the place that you're from is not the center of the universe. It turns out to be. It's even. Right. It's funny. I've been to Japan a bunch of times over the last couple of years, and it has become one of my absolute favorite countries. 2 years ago, I went on a miles run there and turned it into a 8-day trip. Then the year after that, I took my wife on a solo trip there, just two of us. We left the kids behind, and then last year we actually, this past Thanksgiving, we took the kids over there, and just seeing Tokyo. I love New York, but everyone calls New York the center of the universe. Tokyo is so much bigger than New York, and it's such, it's one of the central hubs of Asia. You just realize, all right, as an American especially, we see the U.S. as sort of the end-all, be-all, everything. You realize that we're just another place on this bigger planet, but also you end up meeting so many different people, and you realize how much control you have over your own destiny. It was funny too, because when I was leaving for my trip, all of my friends were very critical of me.
Really?
For going. They said, you have to start working right now. I'm like, I got the rest of my life to work. You guys go enjoy that big firm, enjoy your life. I'm going to go cruise and see what else is out there. And it doesn't have to just be major international trips. You can go to a different city nearby. You can go to a different state. Travel is expensive, but it also doesn't have to be that expensive. I mean, I think about that trip in particular. There were some places that, like, I stayed at a place in Turkey in these tree houses that was literally $1.50 a night. So there are very affordable options when it comes down to it, but you just meet all of these people from all different backgrounds, all different cultures. You realize just how many wonderful differences there are in people in general, and truly how much freedom you have to make choices, including, and a lot of fun choices as well. I made choices on trains I met someone on a train, they're going somewhere else, suddenly I'm rolling with them, and having that level of flexibility to contrast the level, some of the rigidity I have. And that's one of the things as well. I mean, in life, it's interesting. Human beings need a balance of the known and predictable, and
absolutely,
the unknown. And most people you don't see necessarily have the right balance of, you see the people who need every level of predictability, and it becomes an obsessive compulsion. And I have some obsessive compulsive tendencies in certain ways. You can ask my wife the way that I organize everything in our house. But at the same time, allowing and embracing that unknown, arriving in places without accommodations, without a place to stay, and sort of figuring it out, giving yourself that gift and that freedom really opens you up. Because when I booked that trip, before I got to Europe, I had actually arranged for my first few nights, and I ended up canceling the second night and moving on from there immediately. But long-winded way of saying, you just learn to embrace flexibility and be that much more fluid. And just in travel in general, you go in with a mentality of, I'm going to allow myself to truly fall into the experience, and that just opens it up that much more, because you're not saying I have to be there now. You're saying I'm going to go and embrace whatever comes at me. And that's one of those things that really carries over from a life lesson standpoint, of not being too rigid and more focusing on fluidity.
Yeah. And what I found, and one of the things that I always tell people, and you know me, I mean, we're like optimistic guys, we're very positive, but when I talk to people about travel, I will say, something is guaranteed to go wrong. And a lot of people look at me, they're like, well, Brian, why are you saying that? And I say, because if you know that and you expect that, when it happens, you don't freak out and go, the trip's ruined and everything's lost. All you say is, oh, okay, the flight got delayed, or, oh, our hostel closed early, so we've got to find a new one. That flexibility and that adaptability, and also not being so attached to everything going to plan, is actually really liberating and freeing, especially in the U.S., where our culture is very driven by, all right, well, we got to be constantly productive and on schedule and knocking things out and crushing it. And then when you get to this point where it's just totally free and there's no plans, like you said too, you meet some of the most fascinating people, and you recognize that as amazing as our country is, we don't have everything right. We have a lot of things right and a lot of things great, but there's some things that I much prefer in other countries, certain cultural things, giving a hug or a kiss to greet somebody versus a distant handshake. It's amazing how little things can totally reshape your reality. And to your earlier point, when you said it was going to be a few weeks and it turned into 6 months, my dad went to France planning to stay for 3 months, ended up staying for 2 years, and met my mom. So for anybody out there, it's like maybe that perfect person for you is just waiting for you to go visit them. So awesome, Danny. I love that. that is, I think travel is so important. I mean, you know, for me, it's something where I want to see as many places as I can and always make travel a part of my life. And I've been very fortunate to start it off, and so I love that goal of one country per year, and I'm sure you'll get there, dude, so I'm excited for you.
Well, it's funny because I'm starting to screw myself a little bit because I keep going back to Japan, for instance, versus, you know, I'm sacrificing some new places. But, you know, my goal for my kids, I think, is 1.5 countries for every year because they're getting a dramatic head start. My rule for all of my children was I had to have at least one passport stamp before their first birthday, and it wasn't. When I say this is good, it was exotic. It was Grand Cayman, but it wasn't like going to, you know, China or whatever else, but it was still getting them somewhere that wasn't the U.S. And then, you know, people thought we were crazy last year. You're taking a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old to Japan, and it couldn't have been better. And people are like, well, they're not going to remember it. They're not going to, you know, have perspective on it. Like, first of all, my little guy, his brain is fully developing. He might not remember it cognitively, but that experience is going to actually have the most profound effect on him because the way that his brain is developing. And my little girl, just through the different experiences and just the different sights, sounds, smells, people, I think the best gift that I'm giving to them is that travel experience, and to my wife as well. I mean, you know, that was one of the things. She had never really had the opportunity to travel before we met, and when we first started dating, I actually took her to Cuba. We did a 2-week driving trip across the country, and it was fascinating because she'd literally only been to like Mexico and Canada, and you know, instead of taking her to Grand Cayman where she could just chill, I took her to Cuba. Let's just say it was a gray area of how I got to Cuba at that time and how I got back.
Know a guy who knows a guy type of deal.
But it was amazing watching her grow as a traveler in that 2-week period. And in turn, I actually fell in love with her on that trip. She went from, you know, kind of a girl that I was hanging out with to, oh my God, I actually have somebody who can be a companion during this, and that was pretty incredible in itself. So
Danny, I was going to ask, so I've heard, and this is something my dad has said, like from meeting my mom, my brother said from marrying his wife, and this is something that I guarantee I will do before I even consider marrying any girl. I've been told that it's important to travel with them, travel with the
100%.
person. Yeah. And why would you say that's so critical?
Because some of the points that you touched on earlier of things going wrong, dealing with the unexpected, you're going to have to deal with that in life in general, as we both know, and being able to sort of get that in a micro condensed experience, you learn how you individually and collectively react to those experiences. And you know, she was relatively speaking closed-minded about it when we got there, and in a 2-week period her mind opened up dramatically. But there was times that we just had to figure out stuff, and it didn't go exactly as planned, and we figured it out and made adventure out of that versus getting frustrated with it.
That's fantastic. And I love that you said a micro condensed version, because normally what I tell people about that is, for me, I say traveling is like a microcosm of life, is that you condense a lot of unforeseen things, unknown experiences, things going wrong. You condense a lot of that into a very short time frame. And so traveling lets you see how this other person reacts themselves and how they react to you when shit hits the fan, essentially. So it's something that I just think it's so important to travel. And also, just to jump back a little, traveling solo can be such an eye-opening experience. And I'm a very outgoing guy, but I still was nervous to meet new people and introduce myself. But you end up making these incredible lifelong friendships, and it forces you to put yourself out there.
Well, and the funny thing is, too, you make these lifelong friendships that you allow to then go back. And, like, one of the coolest things for us in going back to Japan is seeing friends there. There's a chef that actually didn't speak a lick of English. I'm literally wearing right now the belt that he gave me because, like, 2 a.m. In a, let's just say, sake-induced belt trade exchange. We exchanged belt, but he didn't speak English. I'd been to his restaurant 3 times. We built this incredible heart-to-heart connection. Mm-hmm. But on an overall basis, one of the things that's really served me well in business is that common thread of traveling. Some of the most successful people that I've met and dealt with immediately, one of the things that comes up subject matter wise when we're having more of a social conversation is travel. And I find that a lot of those successful people have really adventured and opened their mind and taken, again, it is funny because when you just say dealing with adversity, poor guy, I'm cruising around Europe and my hostel's closed. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's still the way that you deal with small problems mm-hmm. is also a very can be very reflective of the way that you deal with large problems. And if you learn how to deal with small problems, you'll be much more equipped to deal with the large problems. It's just because if you get anxiety over small problems, that anxiety is just going to be so dramatically amplified and large. Where if you say, I got this in a small problem, you learn to actually have that mentality in dealing with the larger things as well.
Absolutely. It's like building up your your physical strength. The first time you're like, I don't know if I can lift 50 pounds, but when you do that over and over again, and then you start working your way up, and all of a sudden you're at a new max, and you're like, no, I can do this. I can handle this weight. So like anything else, it's that conditioning and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone to grow in the areas that you've decided. So now you have this 6-month life-changing experience, which has now turned you into a travel bug and a travel junkie. And so now you come back to the U.S., and what were the next steps, or what were some of the first steps into these actual companies or more professional experiences?
So, I threw a lot of spaghetti. I was somebody that, I knew that I was a good seller. When I was selling stuff since I was a little kid. I was selling spray silly string when I was 5 years old in the schoolyard. I actually, funny enough, my most scandalous sales position was we would go down to Florida over vacations, and I found this souvenir shop that had, I don't know if you remember those pens that had a woman on it, and then we turned it over, the ink would like streamed out, and all of a sudden you'd have a naked lady on the pen. Somehow I got a hold of those when I was like 7, 8 years old. Again, I was the youngest of 4 in a family of divorce, so there was not the greatest level of oversight of my childhood, but I was buying those and selling those in the schoolyard. But I was in college. I actually sold Cutco knives, which was one of the best jobs actually from a training experience, because I'd start out with my friends' parents and friends of my parents, but then quickly actually started really building a whole network out. So, I had this club promoting business. I did a little bit of practicing law just while I was figuring stuff out just at my father's law firm. I was a terrible attorney. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I decided that I wanted to move to California, and then an opportunity opened. Michael Ovitz, who started Creative Artist Agency, is one of the biggest sort of players in the history of Hollywood, mm-hmm. Starting this new company, and I had somebody that was connected to there. And the next thing I know, I actually get a call on, I think, Sunday or Monday, I think it was a Monday, saying, all right, the company's starting next week, get out here. Literally packed my apartment up in 2 days. I had, one thing I love about Chicago is I was able to just literally call all my friends and suddenly have a 30-person goodbye dinner on a single night's notice, where in LA that would take 2 years of planning.
Yeah.
But I jumped in my car, got out there, all excited. I'm going to be an assistant in training. And the next thing I know, I'm in the mailroom. And talk about it again. It was talk about an unexpected experience. I got there. and I was sold somewhat of a false bill of goods as far as by the person who brought me out. But I rolled with it. And the next thing I know, I'm literally stacking pens in a mail. And by the way, there was the first day of the company's existence. There's 24 people in a room, and then all of a sudden I'm given like a stock room and I'm stocking shit on the walls. And I'm literally I was the mail room, but I decided, you know what? I'm going to stick with this and ride it out. And I didn't spend that much time there. I got promoted out of the mail room, became an assistant. I got actually pretty lucky because the woman's desk who I was supposed to become an assistant, she was a talent manager. Mm-hmm. That didn't work out, and it allowed me to actually get to touch a lot of different aspects of the business. So Michael was trying to buy an NFL team at the time. He also was doing a lot in the digital space. He had, he was kind of changing the game of how Hollywood management's done. So I floated from desk to desk and ended up getting a much broader education, mm-hmm. learning the various aspects of the business and realizing that digital was most intriguing to me. And the funny thing was, I was not a good assistant. I think now, if you put me in an assistant position, I'd kill it. I think I could be a good assistant now. But I was a terrible assistant. It wasn't the right fit. But basically, I essentially got fired off of the desk that I was on, mm-hmm. and I then sat down with the gentleman who was actually running the training program, and we were talking about where I was going to go next. And I looked at him like, I don't think I want to be here anymore.
Nowhere. I don't want to go anywhere within this.
and I just left, and it was my last day. And I recognized this isn't the right fit. I didn't have I had a rent and all that other stuff. I didn't have the deepest infrastructure that I had to support. But I was like, this isn't working. It was like such a blessing in disguise. I basically got fired off of the desk, but not from the company. And then I'm like, I don't want to be here. And it was the most liberating day because I felt it was one of those jobs that I would look at the clock every day. And that is the worst thing in life if you have a job that you're looking at the clock. Mm-hmm. Now I actually have an opposite look at the clock saying, oh shit, it's this late. I have, I need more time in the day. Mm-hmm. But it was, so I walked out of there and ended up going the route of a digital rights management technology company. I had no technology background. A friend of mine introduced me to them, and this is 99, 2000. Ended up working in digital rights management technology and learning. I was the youngest person by 15 people on the sales team. The youngest person by I think like 15 years on the sales team. Mm-hmm. And I just looked at it as an opportunity again to learn and everything else. And I learned the business, and I learned something about sales in general, mm-hmm. that it's not about what you're selling, because if you're selling the coolest thing in the world or something that's boring as hell, it's about the people that you're working with, and both from an internal standpoint and external standpoint, and sort of the cultural aspect of it and the fun aspect of it. So I know it's funny because the reason I'm saying that is I talk to a lot of people now, and I end up in a lot of ways with Accelerate, we do a lot of recruiting as well. Mm-hmm. And with that, I'm always talking to people, I want them to kind of mentally architect what their dream job and everything else. But when it comes to sales, every product will become boring or stale. Mm-hmm. Eventually, and it's less about the product and more about the company and the bigger picture of the infrastructure in which you're playing with. But
Danny, so that brings up an interesting point for me, because sales is something that's always fascinated me, sales and marketing. So if there's anyone that's interested in sales and marketing, what would be maybe like the top 2 or 3 recommendations you would give to be successful in those fields?
One is, this sounds so cliche, but don't take it personally. Salespeople are a lot of salespeople are also emotional people, and they ride highs and lows, and they personalize. And I don't even like using the word rejection. They personalize when it's not an opportunity fit. And so it's always remember, you really have to focus on your internal self and internal confidence in being able to sort of deal with the ups and downs that go with that. Don't get too high on the ups. Don't, I'm a huge Chicago fan, but funny enough, one of my favorite football players of all time is Barry Sanders. I love the fact that, hit on a touchdown, he just handed the ball to the ref.
Never celebrated. Never.
Yeah, no celebration. And I'm not saying don't celebrate. You know me well enough.
Yes.
I'm also a guy who loves to celebrate, but in that, it's just going through, getting it done. Don't think you've done something great by making a sale, and don't let that go to your head. And at the same time, don't beat yourself up on the low. And remember is that as a salesperson, you own your own business within, whether you're selling for something that you actually own or working for a company. You have the ability to be your own person and your own company, and don't get frustrated with the surrounding. Well, this is actually something kind of bigger than just sales. This is actually something that I learned many years back. I'm a huge sports fan, and one thing I've seen a lot of people do, whether they're in sales or anything else, if you're in an organization that you get frustrated with, start focusing less on your performance. I've seen a lot of people do this. Almost start rebelling against the company and really kind of hurting themselves. And the advice that I always give in that is you have to pretend that at least what I do, I pretend I'm a basketball player. I pretend I'm a professional basketball player. I don't care if I have the worst teammates around me, if my coach sucks, if my general manager sucks, if the locker room is the crappiest YMCA out there, ownership of the team sucks. It doesn't matter. I'm still going to go out every game, practice for the games and do all of the necessary preparation. And so on the little bit of a sales lesson is a preparation and a listening component. Just going back to your original question about sales, sales is much more about listening than talking. That is, it amazes me every day how I walk into meetings and I just see people just throw up on the buyer versus actually saying, what do you have, what are your needs? And then really taking the consultative sale and addressing those needs, and really focus on being a listener within that sales environment, because that's one of the things that it blows me away on a daily basis. But then also having a real level of preparation. And this is something that I actually learned a little bit later too, because I was always somewhat of a natural seller. I always felt I can just go in and sell this and kind of wing it and everything else, and didn't necessarily do the level of preparation. And what I learned was, I felt like I was a quarterback with a good arm. There's a lot of quarterbacks with good arms that you still need the coaching of the footwork and how to read the defense and all of that other stuff. So never allow yourself in sales to just rely on that innate ability, no matter how strong your innate ability is. You also got to practice within that and coach with that and everything else. But it goes back to my other theme of being that athlete, going out there and setting picks and playing defense and doing the proper preparation and everything else, because eventually you're going to be on a better team. And when you're on that better team, you want to bring that mentality and that ethic, and don't let yourself dull your skills falling into the trap of your surroundings, and it's
and Dan,
again,
one second. So there have been multiple great points I want to just emphasize and highlight real quick. And so
yes. So going back to my point about listening, that's
so
I'm perfect at it.
Exactly, perfect. And so I was practicing, I was listening. Now for the listeners, so multiple key points, and I just want to highlight, because this is very, very valuable stuff that Danny is sharing. So one of the keys is listening. Now you might say, well, I'm not in sales, so it's not relevant. You tend to, like, as people, and me being a very talkative person, I can fall into the trap of just trying to tell everyone what I'm thinking, and I have this really good idea. And I found that often when I do that, I'm trying to prove something or show something. When I'm in a confident and strong state, I listen and try to get to know this person better and how I can better serve their needs. So that's one huge piece, is listening will benefit you in your relationships, in your work, in everything you do. The other thing is preparation. So you might be, well, I kick ass at presentations. I kick ass at giving speeches. So if you kick ass without any prep work, you're going to be exceptional or world class with prep work. So if
100%.
So if you really want to set yourself apart, that's great that you're really good. But think about how many really good players you knew in your high school, or that, even made it to the college level, but they didn't want to work, and so they fell off. Or when they got onto a better team, their skills weren't up to par because they hadn't been pushing themselves. So do the prep work, whatever it is you're working towards. It doesn't need to be sports. Do the prep work, condition yourself, put in the hours, because a lot of people, we have that impatience, like Danny mentioned before. It's kind of like, I'm just wanting to get there, want to get things to happen. And so when you have that patience to put in the work and to take the time to do things right, all of a sudden, when the opportunity strikes, you're ready. You're not just sitting there and going, oh man, I wish I'd put in the work back when I was on that crappy team. So I love that analogy, Danny. And the last thing, what you had said about don't take it personally from a sales perspective. The way I interpret that is a lesson that I've had to be reminded of a couple times recently, and it really feels like it's sitting in, is don't attach. So there's an old quote, is that your net worth will never equal your self-worth. But when you attach your meaning, purpose, and significance and your self-worth to your accomplishments or the things you're working on or your career, that can be a very, very dangerous trap. So when you go into a sales meeting and you say, if I don't get this client, then I suck, then I'm a bad employee, versus, like Danny said, pulling those lessons from travel, pulling those lessons from law school, and all these seemingly unconnected areas, you can say, all right, I'm excited about this meeting, I've done the prep work and I'm ready. Whether or not, if this doesn't work, it wasn't the right fit and it wasn't the right time, and if I need to get another client, I will find another way to get a new client. It's all about your mindset. It is so, so critical. So, Danny, I just wanted to. Did you have something to add?
No, and also, it's being authentic. It's funny because I'm a goofball, and everyone in my life knows that I'm a goofball, both in personal and professional. Like I in December was in Chicago for some business meetings, and one of my clients and I randomly ended up at a lunch where Mike Ditka was at, and I am buying my son a Mike Ditka teddy bear. What did I name him again? Walter Hallis, Bearclaw Fishmanowski, I believe was his name. That's it. I'm with one of my retainer clients who I love. We're running around the city of Chicago, going and seeing a bunch of clients, all of who I knew. We brought the teddy bear in each meeting. And I made everyone take pictures with the teddy bear. I have him sitting there, and like just doing absurd things. But that's who I am. I wasn't doing it as an act. Mm-hmm. I'm an immature kid. But here's what I've discovered. What amazes me is seeing how many people have a different work personality than they do home personality.
Absolutely.
And that blows me away. My mentality is always just to be myself through and through. And then going back to where that comes from a sales standpoint too, one is don't try and be the person you're not. You may know another salesperson who's so smooth and everything else, and You don't need to. If you're not that natural person, if you're somebody who maybe even a little awkward, but you're awkward, that's endearing. If you go in there and you show a level of authenticity, I'm not saying everyone should go out and get a teddy bear. But if you go out and just be who you are, that will eventually be embraced. There might be some environments that you get totally booted out of, and then you realize, all right, that wasn't the natural environment for me. It wasn't the right fit. And in turn, that allows you to part of that authenticity is truly believe in what you're selling. Don't take a job. And I hate the phrase like, well, he could sell ice to Eskimos. To me, that is a very negative phrase. To me, that is, all right, so he's a scam artist?
Right.
Versus he could sell shelter to them or
something useful for them, yeah.
And it's, so again, that authenticity is just knowing who you are and not trying to be somebody else in that process, because I've seen that happen all the time, both in individuals trying to be the smoother salesperson versus actually being who they are, and I've seen managers try and manage people into somebody they're not versus embracing,
their unique gifts.
Completely.
And so I love that point, because that's something I experienced myself, and I had a kind of realization moment where I noticed that I was being work Brian, who talked a certain way and dressed a certain way and, used business jargon because he wanted to sound like he knew what he was talking about, but really he didn't understand what he was saying. And then there was real Brian. And then I had this realization one day that I was like, whether I want to admit it or not, all of this time I spend at the office is life. That's why I don't like when people say the real world. I say it with air quotes, which I know isn't very effective on a podcast, but but I say it when as I get into the real world and I do a little head bob. So maybe some videos would supplement. But really, I said, I had this realization, and it was from listening to guys like Sean Stevenson, who's a mutual friend of ours, and getting into this material that I realized it's all real life. Whether or not we want to accept that time at the office, like it's almost like we're trying to pretend like that time's not ticking off the clock. But when I had that realization, I said, okay, I need to be more me. I need to just be real. And if people don't, that doesn't mean be an asshole or just not care about what people think. It just means be you authentically and be you unapologetically. And when I stepped into that, I started to have a hell of a lot more fun at work. I did better at work. I was producing better results. So for all the listeners, especially you guys that are looking for a job or just coming out of college, guys and girls, I say guys in a universal sense, consider this. And what I loved what Danny said is you realize that when you act that way and you get booed out of an environment, that's just not the right environment for you. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. That does mean that you may need to search more or go further to find the environment that fits you right. And for all the listeners, I'll ask you, which sales meeting do you want to be in? The one that's serious with this slick back hair, perfect suit guy who says all the cheesy, corny lines that you've heard in every movie where they depict a salesman? Or do you want the meeting with Danny where you laugh, you take pictures with a teddy bear with an incredibly long name, and then you have a fun, relaxed, honest, authentic conversation? Which one sounds more appealing? And Danny, so this is something I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but getting permission to sell and creating trust are two of the biggest conditions in any sales arrangement. Is that correct? Completely,
but then that's actually very correct and a very good point too. It's funny because another sort of, as I'm just sort of reflecting on your previous question about sales advice, is that you're going into, don't put yourself on a different position. When you walk in, don't say, I have to earn this sale. Walk in and say, I'm a business person. I'm here to transact because I'm bringing something of value to this person. I see, it's funny, especially in the media industry, it cracks me up. I'll sit in a lobby of an advertising agency, and I'll see some jackass sitting there with giant boxes of cupcakes that they've brought in for the team and everything else. I'm not against taking care of people and everything else, but as soon as you're doing that, you're putting yourself on a lower level than that person. You're showing I'm kissing your ass. I won't do that. Well, here's the thing too. Like, I walk in. Someone walks into my house. I'm not expecting them to bring cupcakes. I'm expecting me to put cupcakes out for them.
Right. Yeah.
And when I walk into someone's office, the same thing. I'm not bringing them coffee or anything else. It's a courtesy. So if I'm going to see a buddy that I'm doing business with, I'll say if I'm stopped somewhere, I'll pick something up. But I just see that mistake made of the salesperson puts themselves both mentally and then in turn physically in a position of, I am here begging for something from you, and I've even bought you a bribe gift in order to earn your business, versus I'm here to do business with you. We're on the same business level. Don't get me wrong. I take people to dinner. I take people to football games. There's a lot of selfishness. I've never taken a client to a non-Chicago Bears game. So I'm not. But that is more of us getting to know each other. When I'm entertaining clients, it allows me to build more of an interpersonal relationship with an appealing backdrop for both of us. I would never ever just. I've been asked too. I've been asked like, can you get me tickets for this? No, but I'm not sending you somewhere and getting you tickets, but we can go to a game and get to know each other a little bit. And that's one of the things I see so often. Salespeople just self-sabotage by saying, I need to earn this business. Right. And when I say earning that business is actually more post-sale by actually servicing the client and delivering what you've promised them to deliver, but not earning it by begging them for it.
Right. And it's funny, as you were describing that, I just had this image in my head of like the guy who goes to meet the girl for the first date, or is about to ask the girl on the first date, and he's got flowers and like chocolates, and he's so nervous and shaking. And what it really comes down to is this internal fear of not being enough, of, well, I'm not enough, or the product, or this or that, and I can't really sell this, so let me use scams, tricks. And I believe the same thing goes for dating, versus the guy who shows up, confidently asks the girl out because he is confident, not because he's faking it or wears a nice suit, because he's confident and secure in himself, and he's not dependent on this date. He just says, you know what, hey, I think you seem really interesting, or you're hot, whatever, and I want to see if you have a great personality that matches. And if not, no big deal. If it works and it's a good fit and we both can give each other value, then great, versus the desperate, boy, it was like, oh my God, if she doesn't date me, I'll die type of thing. And it's like,
but not looking at it as rejection.
Exactly.
It's again, going back to, it's about a lack of the right fit. Unfortunately, it turned out there were a lot of girls I didn't have a right fit with, according to them at least. But the reality is, it is funny in that dating world. It is very much that same thing. From a first date standpoint, going and like wooing a girl to an expensive dinner. Fortunately, Lauren liked White Castle. Being able to, take someone. Let's go. When I was single and I would date, it was always about, let's do something fun and get to know each other, versus I'm going to impress her by taking her to this place. As soon as you, and again, this is sort of a universal truth, as soon as you're aiming to impress, that is when you are going to depress. Wow. You're going to depress yourself because it's not going to work, and you're going to feel like a failure in doing so, versus aiming of, look, let's explore this whether it be a business relationship, a friendship relationship, a romantic relationship. It's let's explore if there's a fit, and if there's not, that's okay.
And Danny, could you imagine? Now, guys, I've known Danny for a while, and I have met his wife. I've seen how they look at each other, how he talks about her. Danny, could you imagine if we want to round out this sales analogy, if you had taken one of those deals that didn't feel right just because you were desperate for a sale and missed out on this relationship with Lauren? Could you imagine like what your life would have been like had you not been patient and waited for the right match versus just being desperate for the sale, essentially?
No, I can't. And it's funny, too, because I'm even thinking from a business standpoint. When we started Accelerate, before we had a single client, I think we passed on like 9 companies. And at one point, we probably were focusing a little too much on the perfect one. But at the same time, we said we want to find the things that are the right fit. And when I say we were desperate, we didn't feel desperate, but we didn't have a single client at that point. But we held out and waited for the right fit, and that proved fruitful for a variety of reasons. That client worked out, and that led to getting more and more clients, but it also set that tone for that reality. And the same thing, no, I can't imagine, and I see it all the time where people, when I say settle, it's out of fear. They're so fearful of not finding the right person that they sell the another person and themselves on the wrong person being right.
Right. It comes down to a rationalization. Well, I guess I could like X, and no, and it's really on the deeper level. I'm afraid of being alone, so let me just do whatever it takes to get this person to try and be good enough when it's just being inauthentic. So now, Danny, we've got about 25 minutes left here, and there's a couple other key points of your story I want to get to. So to move forward just a little, can we talk a little bit more about the digital media experience? Because I want to touch on that, and then the important moment in your life and that important event. So
yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you my attempted abridged version of the rest of my career. So I worked for this digital rights management technology company, learned really a lot about sort of professional sales organization and a little more buttoned up. That company ended up then going under. It was part of the 2001 just crash and everything else. There was a lot of other things there as well, but that company went under. So what did I do? What do I know how to do best? I went to Southeast Asia for 4 months. But it was funny because I was like, I'm not 100% sure what I want to do. I have a bunch of miles. I'm going to jump on a plane and go to Southeast Asia. Again, people thought I was nuts to do it. I actually thought seizing those travel opportunities in life are just as important as seizing business opportunities. People just get opportunity so sort of business specific, yes, and they miss life opportunities. But we can glance over that. I got back, went to Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia for 4 months. Got back, had a lot of conversations, and then just a friend of mine hooked me up with this company, iFilm, which was one of the first short-form entertainment sites. And the company had just gone from over 200 people to literally 15. So it had just gotten, during that great storm, almost wiped out, but it was still stayed afloat. So I don't know if my mentality was, this is a survivor and we're going to rebuild it, or all right, so I'll get another little job for a while, make a little more money, and then the company will go under and I'll go back somewhere else in the world. But I really saw iFilm as, all right, we can rebuild this. And I got very lucky there because from a sales standpoint, I essentially had unlimited territory. I got on an airplane like a crazy man and just really connected myself across the country from an advertising agency standpoint, from a brand standpoint, and everything else, and just really had was really lucky enough to just be in an industry that was very much brand new and didn't have, we were all building this sort of industry from scratch. So I had the opportunity to, from a sales standpoint, go out and run around and just build these relationships and connections that over the past, almost 2 decades have really fostered into some of the closest friendships that I have, and these are now people who are much higher up. We rebuilt iFilm.
Mm-hmm.
We really what was so cool about iFilm, by the way, and I won't go too deep on it, but it was a company that wasn't just about people trying to get rich.
Awesome.
It was about a joint mission of people really trying to build something together. And it kind of going back to what we were originally talking about, that lesson of law school, we ended up selling the company in 2005 to MTV.
Wow.
But we weren't building it with the goal of sale. We were building it with we are going to make an incredible audience property that started as a short film site and a place for short filmmakers and became a short form content destination and almost the precursor to YouTube.
Wow.
So we sold iFilm to MTV. I went to MTV all wide-eyed and excited. I'm meeting these legends and spending time with Tom Freston and Judy McGrath. These are the people who built MTV and built cable. But I realized that I didn't, even though I walked into this organization at a senior level, thanks to the acquisition and just where I was sitting in the iFilm chain at that point, and realized I didn't belong at a big company. It just, I lost that fire of, I was excited with companies where we could actually make a huge difference versus, all right, we increased our profit margin by 2.8%. So as soon as my sort of contractual time was up, I left and went and partnered with a company called Broadband Enterprises, or BBE, which was one of the first video ad networks. And we kind of from scratch built a solution for brands to start moving television dollars to digital media, and we got more ambitious with it. We started syndicating content across these networks of sites. We started producing our own content. I really had a really cool experience where I actually, my sister pitched me a show that at first I tried to pass on because the idea of going into business in my family terrified me. And we ended up selling her show that was called Mom Life. That was a digital show in 2006 or 2007. Show ran for like 8 or 9 years, and the only reason they're not doing it now is her and her partner in the show actually got picked up by HGTV to have a show that pilot just got picked up, so they're actually executive producers and on-screen talent on that show. So the show could be called Flipping Moms on HGTV, so you should watch my sister's show.
Oh, nice. Well, good plug. And Danny, I have to ask, I was like, being in this world of digital media, being in LA, I know you've met a lot of, big, powerful, famous people. Who would you say have been like one or two of your, I know we're getting closer to time, but I'm just curious here. Who are one or two of your favorite people you've met, whether they be celebrities or, business people, entrepreneurs that you've met through these experiences?
Favorite celebrity ever met? Leonard Nimoy. And I actually spent a full day with him. Randomly, he was next door neighbors to friends that we were visiting in Lake Tahoe. And on 4th of July, it was Lauren and I, our friend's house where we were staying at, another couple who lived next door, and then the Nimoys. And Lenny and I really got along. It was funny because he proved to be this incredibly brilliant mind, and we ended up having these unbelievable philosophical, political conversation. Then I'm going in the bathroom, calling my brother, dude, I'm hanging out with Spock. Forgetting that he was Spock and actually just really relating to him on a very human level. This was actually one of my greatest moments. The woman whose house it was a very accomplished chef. And I go into her pantry and I find a can of Spam, and I pull it out and I start giving her just hell, like, this is your secret ingredient, and long and short, on the back of this, on the back of the can of Spam, there was information about the Spam Museum that is in about 80 hours or 80 minutes outside of or 80 miles outside of Minneapolis. Long and short is I made a phony phone call on the Spam Museum with Leonard Nimoy. Where I use the term hoot and a holler, a good, I went to the University of Wisconsin, so I can go, be a hoot and a holler, we'll take the whole family down there. It was one of my finest moments, but he was just so genuine, authentic, and brilliant. Mm-hmm. So he was, he's probably the most excited, and I didn't meet him in a work environment. It was really very much a social environment, but I would say the number one celebrity that I've ever sort of met or dealt with. Business wise, I've met a lot of very interesting people who've just given little interesting tidbits and everything else, but it's not always even the most accomplished people that you learn the most from. You and I are both big extroverts, very social and everything else. It's about, I am such a believer in just learning information from everybody, whether it be having conversation with your taxi or Uber driver, and sometimes you'll get the most wisdom out of them because they've come across incredible amounts of people themselves. So, dodging your question a little bit, but I'm thinking about it just from the standpoint of how much I've learned and how fascinated I've been by some of the people who you wouldn't even notice or even look at, and I've probably learned more from them than I have from some of the most successful people out there.
See, I love that message because, so for all the listeners, this was a total game-changing mindset shift in my life. And what Danny's talking about, if you approach every interaction and every person you meet and you believe that you can learn something from them, your mind, your subconscious, when you believe this stuff, your mind and subconscious are going to try and find a lesson. If you're looking for one, you will find it. If you come in with the belief that every person has value and every person has knowledge, and it may not be something that's directly applicable to your situation at that point, but that person, whether it be the clerk at the store, it's the person checking you out, it's somebody that you sit next to on a bus, that person might have some inputs, a recommendation, a funny story that could change your life. It's only by opening ourselves up to that possibility and getting by our own insecurities and just saying, I'm going to start the conversation. This happened to me earlier in Chipotle. There was like a girl standing next to me. We had ordered something similar, and I was like, oh, I should say something about that and start a conversation. And then I was like, well, no, that's be stupid. And I was like, dude, just start a conversation. And especially for me, it feels weird, but we talked, and it was just a very fun little interaction, but I walked away smiling because I was like, that was fun. I met a new person. And so for everyone listening, if you are approaching your life and the world around you and looking at people and saying, that's a person that has value and I can get value from, that person doesn't. Just by an external glance or by knowing their job title, you're doing yourself a massive disservice in life, because if you stay in your own head, you're not going to get anything new. You know what you think. If you're willing to open up, and to Danny's earlier point, listen, you'll be exposed to new ways of thinking and new worlds that you may have never even conceived before.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead. Two things on that. One is on the kind of just opening yourself up and everything else. So I hear people all the time say, you've got to be nice to that person or respect that person because they could eventually be your boss or client or whatever else. I think that's bullshit. I think you listen to that person and get to know the person because that person's another human being. Mm-hmm. When you start doing it with an agenda of, what can this get me? versus an agenda of how can I connect, how can I learn something from this person or genuinely connect with them as a human being. It's a very different. I see that mistake made all the time of people say, all right, I'm going to be nice to that person, I'm listening to them because of where they might end up. That's nonsense. It's because they're another human being. It goes back to the second thing of just something that my father said to me as a little kid. He told me the garbage man was the most important person in my life. Because if most people don't show up for work, it's not going to affect me. If the garbage man doesn't show up, I'm going to be living in a pile of garbage. and it's funny because people look at like the garbage person as the lowest person on the spectrum, like just, of job and everything else. They're just another person supporting themselves, supporting their family. They probably they weren't lucky enough to have some other opportunities. They didn't necessarily choose that, but they're doing what they need to do. But the fact of the matter is, infrastructurally, they are incredibly important. I've tried to pass that lesson on to my kids, and now Electra, it's Thursday and she hears the garbage truck outside and she's a little overly excited that the garbage man's here. So I didn't necessarily do the best job of passing that lesson on thus far, but I'm still working on it.
Well, it's a beautiful message because, and here's another thing, guys. So not just listening for stories. If you want to drastically change the amount of connection that you have in your life, start asking everyone's name that you meet. And this was something I started doing a couple years ago, and I was feeling kind of disconnected. I lived in Wisconsin, Danny, for a little over 2 years. I don't know if I told you that, but I was living up there. I was feeling disconnected. I just was like, I'm not having that much interaction. And again, like anything else in life, when you choose to own it and take responsibility, then you go, okay, well, what can I do? And I said, well, I'll just start talking to everybody. And so throughout your day, ask the cashier, ask the taxi driver, the Uber driver, ask their name. Even if your interaction is 20 seconds, most people are just so used to being treated almost like a machine where you give them money and they give you a thing and then you go out and you keep your earbuds in the whole time. Take your earbuds out, engage with the person making your sandwich, engage with the person at the restaurant, ask their name, and trust me, you're going to stand out and you're going to connect because 99% of people won't. Yeah. So love that, Danny. I think I love how we're hitting on so many important, not just sales and marketing and digital media lessons, but these are so many things that parallel and connect so deeply with life. So looking at time now, I want to get to something that we both know is a critical or a foundational part of your story. And I think at the end we can talk a little bit about your most recent business and the work that you're doing. But this is a story that I told you even before I feel is so powerful, and the way that you and your wife and your family have come through this is amazing. So would you be willing to share this story and some of the lessons you've learned through it?
100%. So my wife and I had our first child on March 26th of 2009, and he was born 2 months premature.
And Danny, what was his name?
His name was Kal-El, after Superman, of course.
So, listeners, I had to stop him because his children, and I'm sorry, your daughter's Electra and your son is?
Jedi.
Yeah. So
actually, full name would be Jedi Xavier Danger Fishman.
So I had to stop him there because I love the names for his kids. But okay, so Kal-El was born 2 months premature.
Yeah, but he was, but the funny thing is, it didn't even faze us at the time because we were like, we didn't know better. So, he spent 31 or 36 days in the NICU. We just were there every day and everything else. And he came home and was seemingly healthy, hearty, very happy. We fortunately did get him to Grand Cayman before his first birthday, and unfortunately he never made it to his first birthday. On February 26th of 2010, we pretty much lost him overnight. He had been sick for several days. Lauren kept taking him back and forth to the doctor and everything else, and it turned out that he had a compromised immune system, and literally one morning we found him lifeless, and it was the worst imaginable. It was literally, I attempted to revive, and we lost him. And that was obviously by far and away the worst day of my life, and what I thought was going to be the last day of my life, potentially physically and definitely mentally.
Yeah.
It was just, it was beyond a loss. So when we lost him, it was obviously turned everything upside down, and he was my everything at the time. And I was literally at one point standing on that edge, deciding whether I was going to jump or not, and couldn't have been more foreign for me. I was always an innately happy guy. I had my share of adversity in life with divorce and everything else, but like I was on that life's edge, and as I stood there, I know I've shared this with you in the past, I had this moment, and I basically said, what am I doing here? And I said to myself, if Kal-El were the one here and I were the one gone, would I say jump, or would I say, the fuck are you doing? Would I say, what? Go live for us. The best thing that I could do for him was to live for us. And that's really something that allowed me to get through it, realizing that he wouldn't want me there the same way I wouldn't want him there. When I said, wherever he is now, we're all going to be there eventually. I don't need to race there. But what I really took that a step further, and went through a lot from a recovery period to therapy and everything else. I've always done therapy even since I was a kid. Like, started by necessity in dealing with a family divorce, but then realized how important it is from a mental maintenance. And therapy allows you to be super narcissistic. You go and sit and get to talk about yourself for what's supposedly an hour, but it ends up really only being 50 minutes, which I'm still trying to figure out. But with that, I decided that I was going to go live for us, and really took that mantra. And I started, in my recovery, I started looking at my life and saying, all right, yes, he was an incredible part of my life, and for those 11 months he was my everything, but I had a great life before he arrived. Why am I going to forget that? Why am I going to abandon that? So I started really doing the things, first on smaller steps, then on larger steps, of what made me me. Whether it be going out and shooting baskets, or even just a couple of months after we lost him, Lauren and I did a 3-week driving trip through Spain and Portugal, because that was something that we knew was us. And we had a lot of ups and downs on that trip, and there was a lot of challenges, but we were doing the things of re-embracing who we were as individuals, and really focusing on that. And right after we lost him, Lauren, we didn't even know she was pregnant. She had a miscarriage a couple of days later.
Oh my God.
Turned out to be somewhat of a blessing in disguise, in the sense that we were not ready to be parents again yet. We were going to, at that point, it would have been more of a mental focus on replacement than actually becoming whole in ourselves. But I
still can't imagine that you go through the worst possible reality for any parent. And even, me not being a parent, like losing my mom to cancer was such a huge thing, but she had an amazing full life, touched so many people, and losing a child and then having a miscarriage days later, I can't even, every time you tell me this story, it just hits me on such a deep emotional level, because I can't even conceive the emotions. And to have those two things happen so close together, when you say of being on that edge of just, am I going to jump? That's so far beyond most people's scope of what's a challenge, or the biggest challenge in their life. So, I give you guys so much credit for doing what you've done and taking the steps, but I also love the way that you said, I'm going to live for him. And I think it's an important message for me. Every time I hear it, it's motivational and it's inspirational. And I'm sure there's going to be people listening to this episode that need to hear this, because we all experience loss in one form or another. And I think all of us know that whoever that person or that thing is in our life that we've lost would want us to continue to live and to push on and live for us, not, let go of life because let go of life because that thing or that person is gone now.
And I also kind of developed a mantra out of it as well, or more of a shout out to him. So whenever I'm doing something that I consider awesome, whether it be adventure travel, whether it be scuba diving, snowboarding, or even, just taking a walk or a nice day, I'll just kind of look up and give a little shout out and I say, "We're doing it, buddy." And that's my thing. So I carry him with me when I'm doing something great by just throwing out a "we're doing it, buddy." Mm-hmm. And I feel like I'm doing it not just for him, I'm doing it for me too. And it's okay for me to do it for me. That was also one of the things I had to deal with as well, of it's okay to be happy. Mm-hmm. And I know that you, I'm sure that you dealt with that as well.
Yes,
that loss of, wait, am I disrespecting him? Are you disrespecting your mother by being happy? No, you're showing them the greatest level of respect that you can to them, mm-hmm. by being happy. And it's not something I have to do every day. And it's okay if I'm not thinking about him every day at every moment. Because he's a component of my life, and he is a part of who I am. But he also, he's not here. And I'm going to do what I can for me and for him and for his siblings now, with that. So that was one of the biggest things for me, was really looking at it again and not looking at it as I'm just living for him, mm-hmm. either, but looking at it as I'm also allowed to live for me as well. So then going through just kind of that process of really re-engaging with the things that I love and finding out who I am, because I knew that I wanted to have children again. It was very important. I became so in love with being a parent. So it wasn't that I only missed him, I missed being a parent. But at the same time, I had to accept something. I had to accept that I may never be a parent again, and I had to become okay with that. Mm-hmm. We really wanted to continue building our family, but I really focused on, I need to embrace me and the things that make me happy and who I am, versus I need to get another child to get back to where I was. And the timing really just ended up working out where and this was not a short process, but just, step by step and dealing with a lot of firsts. First is always a big challenge. Yes. Whether it be going to a place that you used to go together, or even it was funny because when it happened too, I was ashamed about it, and it shook my self-confidence pretty dramatically. Mm-hmm. And I was embarrassed that I was the guy that lost a child. I felt that I had failed, and it happened in my home on my watch. Mm-hmm. And I realized, no, it wasn't my responsibility. And I also focused on really the positive of, well, he was here, versus the negative. I didn't, I prioritized the hell out of him while he was here. I was reflecting back. The guy went to Hawaii. He went to New York. He went to Grand Cayman. He went to Aspen. He kind of crushed it in 11 months. He licked a stingray in Grand Cayman. You can actually see that picture on my Facebook page. But he, so I didn't have that, but I also, from from kind of a looking forward, and even going back to like that moment when I'm looking at the Eiffel Tower, of not looking backwards, but always looking forward, and never saying I should have, but saying I will. And for the things that I didn't get to do with him, focusing on saying I will, whether that be I will myself, I will with my wife, I will with our children now. And so we really focused on building ourselves up individually, building ourselves up as a couple. And it was very challenging on us as a couple, because people mourn in different ways at different times.
Yes.
And Lauren, fortunately, is incredibly strong, and just I credit her with helping me survive some of the toughest times. But I also was about building my internal sort of I got this confidence back up by not doing anything artificial, except embracing who I was and who I knew who I was and the things that made me who I am. We subsequently, we had our challenges, and we decided after miscarriages to go the IVF route. We had plenty of challenges with that, including Lauren had an ectopic pregnancy where she lost an ovary, just a bunch of stuff. But we just, we almost had an edge after. When I say overcoming the loss of them, I don't know if that's the fair, but it was just of learning how to process and deal with it positively. But and it allowed me to have a little bit of an edge in life too, by saying, you know what, I was able to survive that. I can handle anything. And really using that negative, and also looking and seeing all of the positives that surrounded that as well. All of the people that came into our lives, and the community that we experienced, and the support, and seeing such an incredible side of humanity, and some of the relationships that I've built in the wake of his loss through that openness. So going back to that embarrassment that I felt initially, I'm now so open and will share with anybody. And it goes back to, I don't know, we don't have that much time, but just I, growing up, especially with my parents' divorce and everything else, I always had to be Superman. I always had to be the person that couldn't show any weakness and everything else. And embracing the openness and sharing the real humanity and emotion and experience that I had built such deeper relationships with people, and also really fundamentally changed me for the positive, because it allowed me to say, I'm not perfect. I am a human being who feels pain, emotion, and everything else, and that's okay. That has helped me so much in life. It's deepened my friendships. It's deepened my business relationships. It was just a fundamental shift in who I was. And subsequently, we ended up getting very lucky, and on December 27th of 2011 had our little girl Electra Cayman Fishman, named after her. So it's Cayman with a K. The K is a tribute to Kal-El, but it's after Grand Cayman, which is a very important place with him. And I swear to God that this is true. I didn't realize this. Lauren and I both came up with Electra separately. Subsequently realized that all of the letters in Kal-El's name were Electra.
Wow.
And then 2 years later, we were lucky enough to have Jedi. And it was funny, too, because when we were pregnant with Electra, I wanted a little boy so badly. I wanted a little boy. We found out she was a little girl, and I went through, a few-hour depression. I was because the doctor, on a previous ultrasound, thought he had kind of guessed that it was a boy, but it wasn't. And then I realized, I slapped myself across the face. I'm like, the fuck's wrong with you? How lucky are you that you're having another child? And ironically, having a little girl was the best thing that could have happened, because if it was a little boy, it would have been more challenging, and there would have been more replacement stuff and everything else. With a little girl, it was more of a fresh start, and I found this incredible daddy-daughter bond that experienced it just on a whole different level. But then the funny thing was, when we were having Jedi, and we found out he was a boy, there was part of me that's like, I kind of want another little girl. But so we got very lucky in the end, and were able to continue building our family. But we would never have been able to do that had we not first rebuilt ourselves and accepted that we might not have that luck, but still that we could have a very happy, fruitful, and really awesome life. even if we weren't lucky enough to have children of our own again. That was a very, very important component. So the timing all just kind of naturally worked out, where there was enough of a period in between for us to re-find ourselves again, both individually and as a couple. But the biggest things for me kind of coming out of all of that was, the we're doing it, buddy, to really say, you're here with me, and I'm not saying I'm not doing it for you. I'm saying we're doing it because we're there. And also, again, the really not having the should-haves, really focusing on I will. And those things were just things that really allowed me not just to get through it, but allowed me to become a better person.
And man, every time I hear the story, it gets me emotional. It hits me on such a deep level, like I said before, because again, I can't imagine the depths, the pain, the loss, the work that you guys had to do. But I love that we're doing it, buddy. Every time I see you, it always brings it back up for me, and I love that story and I love that message. And for the listeners, there's a couple things that I definitely want to call out, because that story is so amazing, but there are a couple lessons that really jump out for me. So one of which he talked about, his whole life he was Superman, and this horrible experience that he would never have wished on himself or his worst enemy came his way. So it was an opportunity to say, okay, either I can let this destroy me or I can grow. And one of the key points of growth was when he was describing being open and being real about his emotions, that's vulnerability. And I'll challenge you that if you're having any difficulty with your relationships, try being vulnerable. And by being vulnerable, I don't mean you need to cry or that you need to express a certain emotion. I mean, be real, be authentic, pull back the curtain and let somebody see who you truly are. And sometimes that takes a real look inside, because when I've done that, sometimes it's time to eat a slice of humble pie and be like, listen, the reason I was acting angry was because I didn't feel like I knew what the fuck I was talking about. So I felt like I had to compensate and blah, blah, blah. But the vulnerability in your life, in all of your, exactly like Danny said, I've seen this so many times, is when I try to cover up and not be me, that's when I live less authentically, I have less fun, I don't do as well. When I just open up and I put myself out there wholly and completely and genuinely, the reason that stands out is because it's so rare. So when you do that, not only do you have more fun, but you liberate and free others to do the same. And then one of the other really key points, when he's talking about you need to do this for you, and how they both needed, as individuals and as a couple, to build themselves up and not be attached to that outcome, like we talked about before.
Yeah.
They said, we're going to work for this goal. We're going to take care of ourselves, because by building themselves up individually first, they're able to, they're not saying I'm reliant on you or you're reliant on me to survive. They're building themselves up, then they build themselves up as a relationship. And then when that opportunity came and when they actually were able to have another child, they were in a much better place. So although, and like most people haven't suffered something as severe as this, everyone has their battles and their struggles in life. And
well, that's actually one thing, by the way, that,
yes,
that
please.
Also, you talk about being as severe. There's also not losing sympathy and empathy because you've gone through something that on paper is worse. That was one of the things where I didn't, and I see people do this all the time, of sort of pain compare.
Yes.
You think you've been through something, look what I've been through. It doesn't, everybody, what they go through is important to them and affects them severely emotionally. Mm-hmm. And I never wanted to be that person who's like, oh, this guy's hard. Well, yeah, real hard problems. Here's what I went through. It's not a competition. Mm-hmm. It's more about, again, having the empathy of, this is how this is affecting that person, It's not a paper comparison, because I see people do that all the time, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to be the one who's trying to win the pain battle.
Yes, yeah.
I hope I lose that battle every time. But it's, don't get me wrong. There are moments that I roll my eyes, and then not even more to comparison. Like, just really, you should be bitching about that.
Right.
I try and be empathetic overall, but
But come on, dude. Yeah.
But at the same time, just on an overall mentality of saying, look, this is something that is important to this person, and it is clearly affecting them emotionally. And again, being empathetic to that versus saying, being narcissistic and saying, but what I went through.
Right. And for the listeners, this just goes back. We keep reiterating it, but it's because it's so important, being a good listener. And part of being a good listener is practicing empathy and listening deeply to the words and watching the body language and looking in the person's eyes, because their eyes will always tell you what's going on. And when you're able to listen in that way, you say, all right, you know what? Maybe losing a pet wouldn't be that big of a deal for me, but it has crushed this person. And if you're able to connect with that person and say, okay, I see this is something, like, let's talk through it, and show them that you care, because especially when people are vulnerable, they want to see that somebody cares, somebody's willing to listen, and someone's willing to connect with them. Because if people get vulnerable and they just get, crapped on, or somebody's just like, quit being a pansy, it makes it harder to open up. So you can be that difference for people in allowing them to be vulnerable with you and to open up and trust you to not only protect their secrets, but to be there and listen. So, Danny, this is fantastic stuff, and it's so important, it's so critical. And the whole message about taking care of yourself first, guys, if you want to truly be there for anyone in your life, you need to be selfish and take care of you so you can give of yourself fully. It's a message we talk about all the time on this show. And so for
putting the oxygen mask on yourself first.
Yes, my parents tell me that all the time. And it's, you put your oxygen mask on first, otherwise you can't help those around you. So, Danny, this has been amazing, dude. I'm so happy we finally got to have you on the show.
No, I so appreciate it. I mean, honestly, man, this is, you know that I love you. And I mean that, I truly mean that from the heart. But I so greatly appreciate you including me on this. I love what you're doing with this show, and I'm so proud of you, brother.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate that. And I'm always excited when we get to see each other at events, so I hope the next one's soon. Now, before we close out, I always have 2 questions that I close out with. So we'll hit these, and then we'll wrap up. So the 2 questions, the first one is that many young adults or millennials, people in my generation, come out of school, or maybe they didn't even go to school, and there's this sense of not being good enough. Once I get a degree, once I get 5 years experience, once I get a certification, then I'll be good enough. But what the problem is that I see is that people don't see the inherent value that they carry, especially as these young people coming into the workforce or coming into the world. So can you say what are some of the primary benefits that you see, or the primary gifts that millennials bring to the world?
It's funny. I mean, they bring a new perspective. That a fresh, different perspective that I hate to say it, aren't necessarily beat down and in turn jaded and have a level of optimism, but it's also I'm just thinking from the standpoint of they're walking into it looks like there's jobs are hard to get and everything else. The reality is we're at such a special time where you have the ability more than any time ever before to really craft your own job and craft your own opportunity, and the world is really opened up for that. So I think millennials are lucky in that regard in walking into a non-traditional workforce, with the ability to much greater control of your own destiny because of us moving more into an on-demand economy, and the ability to to drive different direction and have a newer perspective, and having been the generation that's grown up on the next level of technology.
Love that. Yeah, I believe that it's with our access to information, with our familiarity with technology, and with our passion for growth. It's like you combine those things together, and when you're willing to think outside the box, amazing things can be brought into reality. So love that, man. And the final question, and I'm going to let you pick how to answer this, because normally what I ask is if you could go back and talk to yourself at college graduation, what would be the advice you would give? But I'll offer you the choice. You can do that, or if you could go back and talk to yourself at the time when you guys lost Kal-El, because I feel like that was a far and beyond, not even comparison, much more difficult time. So you can pick how you want to answer it, but if you could go back to either of those moments, which would it be, and what would be the advice you would give to your younger self?
It's a really good question. Let me think about that for a second. I would, I probably have a similar answer to both questions.
Okay.
And it's, don't be afraid. Just, really just telling myself you're going to encounter things that you're going to be so fearful of. Don't be afraid and never lose yourself. And just always know who you are and embrace who you are. And if you lose who you are, always go back to that. And I think that's what I would tell myself at college, and the different ways that life may, again, throw curveballs at you and provide unexpected. Just go back to my own center and my own instinct. And I think that bit of advice applies to both of those situations of, in losing Kal-El, the same thing. Yes, I got help and I worked with therapy and everything else, but I really, at the end of the day, relied on my own instinct. And that was really what got me through. And that's been also a general theme for me. Here's the funny thing. I mean, and this is sort of a 1 second tangent, but just as I kind of think about that in general of going back to yourself. The world's a funny place. Parenting especially. All parents become insecure. I ironically am probably the most confident parent I know, notwithstanding what I experienced, because I know that no one else knows what the fuck they are doing either. But I also know that the species has survived on instinct. And I see all these, my women, men that are reading books, going to classes, comparing themselves. They think, and in life you see this in general. In business, it's funny, when you meet somebody in business, the first thing they tell you is not everything they don't know. The first thing they do is throw up on you with everything they know, which makes you insecure because you feel like, oh, I don't know anything. No, they've just led with what they know the most about. But you see that in parenting. Everybody ends up comparing themselves to other parents and to what everyone else is doing. And I've never done that, and it's worked out very well for me. I've always, again, relied on the instinct, and with the instinct, being able to focus on, this is how I am going to do it, because this is what my body is innately telling me to do, what my mind and soul are innately telling me to do. And I'm not going to worry about how that person's doing it, and I'm not going to allow myself to be judged by that, and just really looking at myself, judging myself. And again, the species has relied on instinct, so going back to that kind of level of confidence, I'm going to rely on myself and my own instinct. So long-winded sort of answer to your question. It would be, trusting your own instinct and don't worry about what anyone else is going to tell you, think, judge, or anything else. It's going back to center.
Mm-hmm. There's so much to be said for listening to your heart and your intuition. It's something that we're not taught, but when you get into that place where you can feel confident enough in yourself to trust your decisions and trust that you know what you really want, it's an amazingly liberating experience. And the other key point that you said about like don't compare to other people, my coach has said to me so many times, compare leads to despair. When you start looking at like, well, I didn't make as much as him, or I didn't do that, it's like, well, dude, you just started a business. You just rode a snowboard for the first time. No, you're not Shaun White, but you don't have to be. You've made progress, you've learned, you've grown, and that's where the joy in life really comes. So Danny, man, this has been amazing. This has been super fun, and I know you and I could talk.
It's been an honor for me, man.
Oh, dude, I'm so glad to have you on, and we could talk. You and I both could talk for like 12 hours, but I don't know how many downloads a 12-hour episode's gonna get.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
so before I let you go, I know people are gonna want to come and find out more about you and learn more about Danny Fishman. So, what are the best sites or resources for them to check out to find out more about you?
Well, anyone who wants to be my Facebook friend, just Danny Fishman, and I live in Los Angeles, because I am an open book on Facebook, as you know, for better or for worse. My level of thank God that social media didn't exist when I was in my younger years, because I was an idiot. I would have needed to move out of the country for the shit that I would cause. But the second, business-wise, my site's Accelerate, which is EXCELLERATE.global. So EXCELLERATE.global, and www, obviously. That's my business site, but I'll accept anyone's friendship on Facebook, because I feel like I don't know 2/3 of my friends on Facebook anyway, but I love them.
Fantastic, man. And for all the listeners, those things will be included in the show notes, links to Danny's page, Danny's business page, and his Facebook page as well. So, Danny, if you hang out for 1 minute after the call, I'm just going to do my little wrap up here. So, thank you guys all for listening today. It's been fun for me, and I hope you guys had a great time listening too. If you'd like to learn more about overcoming graduation in the OCG community, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or on Stitcher, and you can also check out overcominggraduation.com. If you want to check out the Overcoming Graduation social media presence, you can check out our YouTube channel, Twitter account, Instagram account. It's all there. And I liked how I said our when it's just me. Like there's like this group behind me. Oh yeah, our presence. It's me and my little stuffed animal Baymax from the movie Big Hero 6. That's my team. So,
we should get them together with Walter.
Yes. All right. That's a goal, is to get my Baymax and Walter together in a picture. Then if anyone would like to reach out to me directly with feedback on the show, interview recommendations, or if you just like to contact me about personal coaching, you can contact me at brian@overcominggraduation.com. So thank you guys all for listening today. That's it for you, and we will be talking to you guys again real soon.
Hey guys, I've got one more note for you before I let you go for today. I wanted to ask that this is something that I'm going to be doing in all my future episodes, but ask if you felt that this was impactful, that this helped you in some way, or if you know someone that you believe it could help, please share, like, subscribe, because one of the greatest compliments you can give, this is something I always hear Jordan Harbinger say on The Art of Charm, but one of the greatest compliments you can give me is to share this with for your friends and following. So if you'd be willing to share this, to put it out to your social media presence, to subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews, leave likes, that makes a huge difference and continues to help my podcast grow. So thank you all for listening. Thank you for your time today. Look forward to talking to you guys again soon.